Hello, my name is Patrick Usher, and in this video I wish to continue to discuss my recovery story from POTS in a bit more detail. As I mentioned in my last video, I have a video up which I made in November 2015, which went over at the time. It was the day after I finished the brain rewiring. It went over at the time, the whole process. But I just think it's helpful now at this stage, some years on, to look back and pick out particularly salient aspects of the recovery as a way of offering that to other people now who are going through the same process. So in my last video, we paused at month 2, the video I made out in the garden on a sunnier day than today. So I paused there at month 2, and I'd just taken a flight, you'll remember, to my home, well, not my home, but my dad's home in France, and where I've grown up a large part of my life, but anyway. And it's a farmhouse in the middle of nowhere in southern France, and very beautiful, great place to convalesce. And I was, stunned by the fact that I was able to take a flight, something I never thought would be possible ever again. But I made it, and as I say, I was a little bit sort of off that day, but the day after I was fine. I was back to myself. So that was about day 60, and I kept on going. So I kept up with my routine of brain rewiring in this new circumstance, except this time I often also went outside because it was sunny and warm, so I'd find a nice spot in the garden to go and do the practice, or I just do it sitting on my bed in my room. And again, I stuck with the sort of first thing in the morning before breakfast, midday, and then 5 o'clock in the afternoon. Now, I'm not saying that I stuck to this like absolutely religiously. Sometimes I did it after breakfast. That's just there was a kind of shall we say, there was a variability. It's not. I don't want to come across as if I was a robot. I wasn't a robot, and life gets in the way. But generally speaking, it was first thing-ish in the morning, sometime around midday, and sometime around 5, and sometimes just before bed as well. But usually at bed, that was the time I would kind of note down in my diary all the successes of the day vis-a-vis the practice, and charting progress and that kind of thing. And a great thing to do to then look back over, the progress you've made and see where you've come from and where you're going to. So that process continued, of course. And for the first month that I was there in France, I didn't go on any kind of major long walks. I did potter around a lot in the garden, did a lot of gardening. I was doing at this stage some physio and kind of basic strengthening exercises. So I was doing squats, and I was doing some push-ups and Pilates and yoga, and some exercises that I'd been given for my knee from a physio. My perennially difficult knees. So young to be so far gone. Anyway, and I was doing that kind of thing, and that was getting my heart rate up, and but otherwise I was just kind of enjoying being outside in the garden in the summer. And I was in a hammock a lot of July of that year. I went and I found all of my old comics. So I have the entire Tintin collection. Tintin, the Belgian reporter, a great series of books, and all of the Asterix the Gaul. I have all of those from my childhood, and I just took them all to the hammock and I just read all of them again. And that was a great thing to do. And I got a lot of other little books that I found that were back from childhood times. And I wasn't in the mood for reading anything particularly taxing. Having tried to do a PhD on ancient philosophy, I was tired of that. So my level was, C-spot run, no, a bit more than that. But I did actually go and pick up sort of old childhood books, because I think it's nice, to go to things from before the traumatic times, times when things were more all right, relatively speaking, and to pick up and read those things. And that was a really nice aspect. So the comics and earlier books from childhood and from my teenage years as well, and that was really nice. And also a lot of movies from that I would have watched when I was younger and which I hadn't watched in years. I've never personally kind of managed to get onto the sort of Netflix thing. I have a bit recently, but basically a lot of the movies I had are still from childhood. We still have them on VHS or DVD, so I just went and watched most of them again. And that was great. Again, very nice thing to do. And I'd really tried to get my mind as much as possible off even thinking about the even theoretically about the nature of POTS and other limbic system impairments during this time. I read and reread many times Annie Harper's book Wired for Healing, which features great and inspiring case studies and helpful theory to consolidate your own recovery. And I also read Bruce Lipton's Biology of Belief, which was a good book as well. But ultimately, you kind of don't need to, as I said before, after a certain point, you don't need to do that kind of thing, and you're better off just doing normal things, right? So that's what I tried to do, especially during those 2 months. Played the piano a lot, got into some writing of a novel that I was working on, things like that, in the 4th month, when I got to start of August, I started walking, doing some hill walks around the nearby fields, and that went really well. And I did that most days. At the start, it was more like every 3rd day, then every 2nd, and then tried to do them every day, in addition to the strengthening exercises that I was doing. And so I was kind of ending up with quite a normal routine of walks and workouts, and was doing really well with that. Now, and then swimming as well. So I started swimming again in that 4th month, going to nearby lakes, and at the end of August there was a super time when one of my sisters and her daughter my niece came and visited us for a few days. That was a beautifully normal time because we went swimming in a lake together. And I remember on the way back from that experience, sort of sitting in the car and thinking, like, how calm I was, how peaceful, how normal the day had been, how I was absolutely fine, basically, and almost wanting to pinch myself. Is this really true? Did this really happen? Is this, it just feels extraordinary because 4 months beforehand, things were awful. And then suddenly, it's sunny days, right? So, of course, life never stops being hard and complicated, but I think you know what I mean. So it was an extraordinary feeling of, is this really true? And really, I had this 2-month period, July and August 2015, in France, and I really pushed on a lot with the brain rewiring during that time. I really stuck with it. My chemical sensitivity basically was 90% improved by the end of this period. I could still get an occasional whiff of chemicals, something that still happens today, but I don't know, that could be normal, to be honest with you. I don't know, it doesn't bother me, but basically that was normal, and I was able to take exercise properly. My heart rate scores by the end of the 4-month mark, when I was in France, they were nearly always between 10 and 20 beats per minute increase, supine to standing, so they're perfectly normal rate, and usually under 100 as well when standing, and typically in the 80s. So everything was normal from that point of view, and really I would say that I was pretty much there actually after those 2 months in France, and but I was basically fine. I think that there was still in month 3 there was the ups and downs, so I would have some bad days, but the bad days were nothing in comparison to what it was like when I was sick. I mean, they would have been good days when I was sick. So I was sort of, I might feel lethargic and achy or something like that. But that kind of cleared up for the most part after the 3rd month, and then it was more steady upwards or steady plateau, and so things were good. And what else can I say that's useful? I still had to give space for the grief. There was a lot of grief. There were times where about my mum's passing, there were times when I had to howl at the world, to put it that way. Had to scream at the unfairness of it all, and those times had to be respected. And then I would have to pick myself up and give space, and then eventually start to settle back down to the rain rewiring. But I know that the DNRS recommends that you don't engage in the practice after bereavement, too close to bereavement, and I totally get that and respect it. However, in my case, given the circumstances, I had very much, as you will know if you've watched my videos, promised to my mum that I would do all in my power to get better. And I remember in early May of that year, before I started the DNRS properly, sort of having this feeling in me that I would fulfill this promise all my life, or I'd die still trying. I wasn't going to give up. So I could be 70 and I'd still be trying to get better, as far as I was concerned, because I'd made the promise, and that's what I wanted to do. Now, I had no idea that it was all going to come together well so soon. That was the blessing. So I gave myself the space for grief, but actually the promise I made to my mum spurred me on to get on with it. And I actually think that the process of the DNRS, for various reasons, and I don't go into the nature of the practice because that's their copyright and I don't talk about it, but that was helpful in another way, in kind of giving me perspective on my life as a whole. So, and giving me reasons to be joyful in and amongst the sadness of the grief. And I think my mum would only have wanted that. So so that was the months. Those 2 months were very pleasant for the most part, and there were kind of problems with the heat at times, and that's wasn't POTS related. It's just I don't like it when it gets too hot. So there were problems with the heat, and I was glad, of the times when that wasn't the case. It's the French summer, so it's going to be hot at times, right? And everyone struggles in the heat, so that wasn't easy, but I say it wasn't POTS related. And then, so I'll just might as well finish the story. So then I got to, just to say briefly also, during this period, as was my entire recovery, very minimal technology use, very minimal computer use at all. And I was, as I say, an hour a day, maximum. A lot of days I didn't go on the internet at all or on the computer at all. I deliberately cultivated simplicity. I deliberately didn't want technology, the infiltration of pinging of emails and all of that sort of stuff. So I would just leave everything for a few days, pop online for an hour, deal with the emails as they come in, and then get rid of it again. And I talk about how I did that in my video, the use of technology during POTS recovery. I think it is a very, very important point, as I laboured in my last video. I won't labour it again here, but I think it's a really important additional factor that really helps with motivation, because you're much more in touch with yourself when you're not able to constantly be drawn and sucked in to things outside of yourself on a screen. So that was, that was something I stuck with. A lot of the time I just go into the garden, I would sit down and I would look at the trees. There are fruit trees in the garden. I would sit down and I would look at them, and slowly but surely I just scan my eyes over them, feeling this intense joy at just being able to do that. I would sit on the grass and look at the butterflies. This is what you do when you have been through hell and you're coming out the other side and the hell is receding. You just sit in the gentle sunshine and you listen to the breeze and the trees, and you look at nature around you, and there are deer sometimes that pass through, and you look over at the deer or whatever. I would lie in the hammock, just gently feeling the sensations of the hammock as it goes from side to side, seeing the breeze in the tree above me, all that. I do that for hours. I'm not joking. I was just literally, I go outside, I'd say, what will I do now? I'll sit outside and just look at a tree. And it was the nicest thing ever. It really was the nicest thing ever. So yes, that was lovely. And what else can I reasonably say? Start of September, so into month 4, left my home in France for 4 weeks, and I went to England, and I made my first trip on my own without my dad. So I went to the Benedictine Abbey that I talked about, Core Abbey on the Isle of Wight, a very special place to my heart, very close to my heart, also a place that was close to my mum's heart. And I went there and for 10 days, and it was first trip on my own, and it was great. It was super, and I really thrived on suddenly being out of the, well, a monastery is a pretty secluded place, but being out of the extreme seclusion of where I'd been in France, which was important for the recovery, but it was nice suddenly to be surrounded by people again, to be talking to people, engaging with people, and that was special, and a great trip, and gave me a huge amount of confidence. Going blackberry picking with Benedictine monks, why not? So that was a great trip, and gave me a lot of confidence. And then I was a few more weeks in England, got to catch up with my friends, and again was continuing on with great progress, sticking with the discipline. Heart rate scores all completely normal at this point. And then returned to France start of October, and moving into those beautiful autumn months, and they are beautiful, very beautiful autumn months there, and really enjoyed that. Again, kept up with all the walks, everything. I started writing my book on POTS actually during the start of the 4th month. I was starting to put my thoughts on paper because I just simply couldn't not anymore. I felt I was out of the woods as far as the illness was concerned, and I had all these ideas about why this program was working for me. So I just started to write it by hand initially, and then I typed it up later. And the book was actually largely finished by the end of the 6-month period. So I just kind of wrote it and then refined it over the next year and a half. But the bulk of it was written in that period. And yes, so I things continued. I think especially by the start of month 5, I was feeling, as normal as I was going to. I'm not saying that it was a question of feeling like I could go and climb Everest. I've made this point before in the myth of 100%. In a video I talk about the myth of 100% recovery. It's in a video called "What Does Recovery from POTS Look Like?" And probably the truth is that I, at that point was kind of getting through life at about 80% capacity, but that's better than I had been in years, and it's fairly normal. Most people are in that kind of range. So it was great. It was super. It's better than 10%, and I didn't have POTS. None of my heart rate scores indicated that I had POTS. So I was delighted with all that, and thrilled, and but start of month 5, I probably could have stopped there, but I didn't. I said, it's a 6-month program, I'm going to continue on. So I think for the last month I just did an hour or an hour and a half of the visualizations a day, because I wanted to give myself a bit of a break, and I just did that. And I remember my last practice on November the 11th 2015. I was sitting on a hilltop in the French countryside, overlooking the beautiful land all around, and I did my last practice just sitting there, listening to this, also being suffused with the sounds of nature all around me, and bowing my head at the end of it, and crying at the incredible journey that I had been on over the previous 6 months, because there is nothing like the DNRS journey. And I've been on some incredible journeys since then, in other ways, in terms of self-healing and finding meaning in life and so on. I've been on some amazing journeys since then, and transformative in their own ways, very powerfully. But there is nothing like the DNRS journey. And just feeling that you have a new primal brain, in large part, not entirely. There are other aspects, as I've said before, like if you have complex post-traumatic stress, I don't think it can help with that. Other things can help with that. But in terms of rewiring out of POTS and severe trauma, it was the most amazing thing ever. And I just felt that this was the answer to something I've been looking for not just in terms of recovering from POTS, but since I suffered a devastating emotional trauma when I was 18, especially, that from that point on I had been prone to be a very hypervigilant person, and the DNRS removed a huge amount of that. Not all, as I said, but a huge amount, and I just felt this is something I've been looking for years. So what a lovely moment it was to do that last practice. I have gone back to the DNRS since. I'll do a video about that some other time, because sometimes you need to. Not because you have sort of disastrous symptoms, but sometimes the stresses of life make it a good idea to return to it, albeit briefly. But that was the core rewiring. That was goodbye POTS. That was everything. That was start of new life. And the week after that, I went on a week-long trip to Dublin, and on my own, and I saw everyone, all family, all friends. Packed in a very, very tight schedule, went up to my old school, saw as many people as I could, and loved that trip. It was a very special trip, and just felt really, the best possible kind of way of signifying to myself that I'd done it, I'd made it, and I had recovered, and it was a packed week, and I could do it. I could do all of it. So there you are. So that's really, what I want to say. The main things about my, in terms of sort of ups and downs and so on of recovery are more pertinent, more relevant in the first video I did. In this video, really, I'm just finishing the story. It was all very much uphill, especially from month 3, and it was a very joyful process, and I loved it. And you know what? I'd love to do it all again someday. I really would, without the stress of recovering from limbic system impairment. I'd love to do it all again, and I think it's a fantastic process and a beautiful one. So that's my finishing off the story of recovery. In another video, I will at some point in the future talk about my life in general terms from November 2015 up until now, almost 2 years later. And talk about sort of challenges that I've had, at times when I have gone back to the DNRS practice briefly. The last year, for various reasons, has been quite a stressful one, and has involved a lot of positive self-change, but at the same time, as I say, has been stressful and disruptive. So my point in saying that is that the DNRS is not a magic cape. It doesn't shield you from the realities of life. It just tries to return you to a normal limbic system. But so I'm going to, at some point, I'll do a video about my life story since recovery, so as to give you a sense of, how things are normal afterwards, and how life is still hard, and and sometimes you may need to go back to the practice just to give yourself that gift of cutting any sort of potentially overly stressful situation in the bud, basically nipping it in the bud. So that's that. Thank you very much for watching this video, and I look forward to your thoughts and wish you a pleasant day wherever you are.